Chapter 1: The Whispering Trail. The town of Ashmore was nestled deep within the folds of an ancient forest, untouched by the modernity that enveloped the world outside. The residents, an insular mix of old families and wanderers who had chosen to disappear, spoke in hushed tones about the forgotten path, a network of overgrown trails that crisscrossed the woods. No one could recall the path's origins, nor the purpose they once served. But everyone agreed on one thing. The trails were cursed. The warnings were vague but chilling. Never step onto the forgotten path. If you do, the ghosts will find you, and they never let go. A group of outsiders arrived in Ashmore one grey October afternoon. They were 4 college friends on a hiking trip: Ellie, Mark, Jasmine, and Ethan. City kids, restless and eager for adventure, they'd chosen Ashmore for its secluded charm and promise of unspoiled nature. They were oblivious to the weight of local superstition. At the diner where they stopped for lunch, Ellie overheard 2 elderly women discussing the Trail of Echoes. She leaned closer. "What's that?" she interrupted, her curiosity piqued. Both women stopped mid-sentence, their eyes widening. The younger of the 2, a woman with silvery hair tied into a bun, leaned forward and whispered, "It's part of the forgotten path. If you value your lives, you'll stay away from it." Jasmine rolled her eyes when Ellie relayed the conversation back to the group. "Classic small-town scare tactics," she said. "They probably tell that to keep tourists out of the good spots." Ethan, always the thrill-seeker, grinned. "Sounds like a challenge to me. Let's find it." Chapter 2: Into the Shadows. Armed with maps and supplies, the group set off early the next morning. The main hiking trails were well marked, but Mark's curiosity led him to examine older, less trodden routes. As they trudged deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, the sunlight dimmer. It was Mark who first spotted it, a narrow opening in the underbrush marked by a weathered wooden sign. The lettering was almost illegible, but Ethan squinted and read aloud, "Trail of Echoes." "Well, there it is," Ethan said, smirking. "Let's see what all the fuss is about." Jasmine hesitated. "We don't even know where it leads. What if we get lost?" Ellie glanced at the sign, then back at the group. "Come on, how bad could it be? It's just a trail." Reluctantly, Jasmine followed as the group veered off the main path and onto the forgotten path. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees towering like silent sentinels. The air was heavy, and the only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional snap of a branch. Minutes turned into hours, and the trail twisted and turned with no apparent destination. Ethan's usual bravado began to wane, and even Mark looked uneasy. "I think we should turn back," Jasmine said, her voice tight. "We've come this far," Ethan argued. "Let's see where it leads." Chapter 3: The First Signs. As they pressed on, an unnatural stillness settled over the forest. There were no birds, no rustling of animals. Even the wind seemed to avoid this place. Then came the whispers. At first they were faint, indistinct murmurs that could have been dismissed as the rustling of leaves. But as the group continued, the whispers grew louder and more insistent. They seemed to come from all around, yet from nowhere at all. "Did you hear that?" Ellie asked, stopping in her tracks. "Hear what?" Mark replied, though his tone betrayed his unease. "The whispers." Ethan laughed nervously. "You're imagining things." But Jasmine grabbed Ethan's arm. "No, I hear it too." The whispers grew louder, forming words now, words that spoke their names. "Ellie, Mark, Jasmine, Ethan." Panic set in. "Who's there?" Ethan shouted, spinning in circles. The whispers stopped. The silence that followed was even more unnerving. Chapter 4: The Lost Cabin. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the group stumbled upon a clearing. In the centre stood an old, decrepit cabin, its windows dark and its door slightly ajar. "Let's stop here for the night," Mark suggested. Are you crazy? Jasmine snapped. This place is creepy as hell. It's either this or the woods, Mark countered. Reluctantly, they entered the cabin. The inside was sparse with dusty furniture and a fireplace filled with ash. There was no sign of recent inhabitants, but the air was thick with an unplaceable tension. That night, as they huddled around a small fire, the whispers returned, louder and clearer than before. This time, they weren't coming from the woods. They were coming from inside the cabin. Chapter 5: Haunted Memories. Ellie was the first to notice the photographs. They were scattered across the cabin's walls and shelves, all black and white images of people standing on what appeared to be the forgotten path. These people, they look familiar, Ellie said, her voice trembling. Mark picked up one of the photographs and froze. No way, he whispered, holding it up for the others to see. The photo showed the four of them, standing exactly where they were now. Jasmine gasped. This isn't possible. We've never been here before. Before they could process the discovery, the whispers erupted into screams. The room grew colder, and the shadows in the corners seemed to stretch and writhe. Ethan grabbed his flashlight. We're leaving, now. But when they opened the door, the forest was gone. In its place was an endless void, shrouded in mist. Chapter 6: The Ghosts Reveal Themselves. Hours turned into days, or so it seemed. Time had lost all meaning. The cabin became a prison, its walls shifting and closing in. The whispers took on forms, shadows that moved with malicious intent. One by one, the group began to unravel. Ethan was the first to break. He insisted he saw someone standing in the corner of the room, though no one else could see it. They're watching us, he muttered, rocking back and forth. They're waiting for us to give in. Ellie tried to keep the group together, but even she began to hear the voices. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were memories, fragments of conversations she'd never had but somehow knew. Chapter 7: Escape or Damnation. The cabin finally released them, but not back into the world they knew. The trail led them to a place that defied explanation, a labyrinth of fog and shadows where the trees whispered secrets and the ground pulsed like a heartbeat. Mark was the next to go. He strayed from the group, drawn by the sound of his mother's voice, calling him from somewhere deep within the mist. They found his body hours later, or what was left of it. Desperation consumed them. Ellie, Jasmine and Ethan pressed on, but the path seemed endless, looping back on itself. They began to see figures in the distance, flickering like mirages. Some were familiar, faces of loved ones, long dead. Others were grotesque, twisted forms that defied human anatomy. Chapter 8: The Price of Survival. Ellie was the last to realize the truth. The path didn't lead anywhere because it wasn't meant to. The forgotten path was not a trail through the forest. It was a threshold between worlds, a liminal space where lost souls wandered for eternity. Jasmine vanished next, swallowed by the shadows as she screamed for help. Ethan and Ellie were alone now, clinging to each other as the ghosts closed in. Ellie, Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. I think we're already dead. No, Ellie said, though deep down she knew he was right. We have to keep moving. But there was no escape. The path had claimed them, as it had claimed so many before. Chapter 9: Ashmore's Secrets. Weeks later, a new group of hikers arrived in Ashmore, oblivious to the town's whispered warnings. At the diner, the old woman with the silvery bun watched them with knowing eyes. They never learn, she muttered. Far away, deep in the forest, the trail of echoes awaited its next visitors. And the ghosts of Ellie, Ethan, Jasmine and Mark joined the chorus of whispers, calling out to the living, luring them onto the forgotten path. What began as an innocent hike had become an eternal nightmare. For those who strayed onto the forgotten path, There was no going back. Only the ghosts remained to tell their stories.